it was ordered in 2017, it reported last year, but ITV, LBC and the Independent newspaper are reporting that evidence was suppressed and that civil servants were instructed that the main aim of the game was to be seen to be doing something, in quotation marks. In light of the letter that the Home Secretary's received today from 30 different groups, from Mumsnet to the British Medical Association and Royal Colleges of Obstetricians and Nursing, in light of the very moving statement my friend from Walthamstow made on the same subject last week and the daily distress that women are still suffering up and down the country, can we please get her to right this wrong and have a fresh inquiry to clear up the mess of her two predecessors?
Can I first of all, once again, thank the honourable member for giving me notice of her question. What I would say is the matter she raised is not a matter for me as in the chair today. But I know that the responsibilities in the Home Office have absolutely heard what you've got to say, and I'm sure the Home Office will be taking that on board. And once again, I know through your good offices and colleagues of your good self will ensure that when we return on Monday, that this matter is the way forward for it to be raised again. Peter Granton.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I apologise I couldn't give advance notice of my point of order because I had to remain in my seat hoping to catch the Speaker's eye. But in his answer to my honourable friend in the SNP front bench earlier, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster very, very clearly accused the Scottish National Party of being a sectarian organisation. It's the second time he's done it from the dispatch box. Now, I appreciate, Mr Deputy Speaker, that it's not a question of order as to whether the remarks are offensive, although I hope on reflection he will understand that those comments are not only deeply offensive but highly irresponsible accusation to throw at any organisation that works so tirelessly to rid Scotland of the cancer that is sectarian bigotry, a cancer which was very prominent in the community in which I and a member of my colleagues grew up. But can you advise me, Mr Deputy Speaker, is it still the case that a minister who says something untrue from the dispatch box must be given a reasonable chance to correct the record? If they refuse to correct the record, then it is not possible for them to remain as a minister in the government.
In fairness, it is up to the front bench whether they wish to, and I don't know whether the Duchy of Lancaster would want to speak or not. That's his choice, but if he does, of course, I will give way. What I would say is, you wouldn't expect me to comment on, I wasn't chairing the debate, and in fairness to Mr Speaker, if it was disorderly, he would have said so. And that's the one thing I want to be clear on, that in fairness to Mr Speaker, he will have done the right thing at that moment in time. Christopher Leslie.
In order, Mr Deputy Speaker. Parliament is expected to prorogue today, but unusually the Privy Council website still doesn't list an order in Council having been approved for prorogation. The matter is listed on the order paper and in the House of Lords on the order paper, and yet for some reason there doesn't appear to have actually been an order in Council passed so far, according to the Privy Council website. Now, normally, Mr Deputy Speaker, orders in Council for prorogation are passed several days before it actually occurs. It's 3:26 p.m. I wonder what's going on.
It's not a matter for the Church, not for me to speculate on the Privy Council. And of course, I'm sure in due course, and I'm sure that you will not take your eye off your mobile phone to ensure that that first-hand knowledge will be through to your good self once you see it on there. But it is not a matter of the Church, as much as it's frustrating. And as a member of the Privy Council, I've got to say, I have no further information to add. Rachel Reeves.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Lots of people will be watching Parliament on television today, but of course 30 years ago that wasn't possible. 27 years ago, Betty Boothroyd became the first female Speaker of the House of Baroness. Betty Boothroyd became Speaker of the House of Commons, and today it's her 90th birthday. I wondered what advice the Deputy Speaker could give on how we could all go about wishing her a happy birthday.
One of them is not to sing in the chamber. But what I would say to you is, I have the greatest respect for Baroness Boothroyd. She is one of my idols, of somebody who I look up to, who set an agenda in this House that we can all respect, the first woman Deputy Speaker. And I've got to say, it's a privilege to have known her. It's a privilege to have been in this House when she was in this chair, and everybody who have ever worked with her hold her in the highest esteem and respect. And the one thing I would say is, happy 90th and many more to come, because she's a great lady that I will always respect And I always remember fighting the by-elections of Nelson and Combe, which my father took over as the MP afterwards. So yes, we do have a great affinity. Right, let us move on to the business. We now come to the 10-minute rule bill. Maria Caulfield.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about National Health Service bodies establishing nurse staffing levels. Firstly, can I start by declaring an interest as a nurse and as a member of the Royal College of Nursing who are leading the campaign for safe and effective nurse staffing. Nursing, in my view, is one of the most underestimated professions in the country, if not the world, because while everyone loves a nurse, with colloquial terms such as angel or having a vacation, hero, caring or compassionate being used to describe us, the true impact of nurses and nursing to the nation's health has never been truly recognised. We are more than just a doctor's assistant. The clinical impact of an experienced nurse who holds a patient's hand as they die and at the same time is assessing their level of pain or symptom management, or the advanced nurse practitioner who in places like the Royal Marsden's Clinical Assessment Unit can treat a patient with acute ascites and manage them by inserting a drain to deal with their symptoms, or can look for the first signs of sepsis, are truly saving lives. There is increasing evidence that the right number of qualified nurses can improve patient outcomes in terms of mortality, morbidity and quality of care, and that conversely, insufficient nurses can have potentially life-threatening effects for patients. A study reported in the BMJ by Aiken et al. Looked at discharge data from hospitals for over 275,000 surgical patients in 188 hospitals across Europe, and they found that the greater the number of professional nurses was associated with the lower odds of mortality. And likewise, Bridges et al. Only last year in the BMJ also found that the addition of qualified nurses makes a difference to patient outcomes. And it's not just simply the addition of healthcare workers numbers, it is that qualified and experienced nurse. There is something in the skill and experience of qualified nurses that improves mortality rates, morbidity rates and quality of care. And while record numbers of nurses have joined the NMC nursing register, with 8,000 more nurses and midwives now registered to work in the UK, there remains over 43,000 nursing vacancies in England alone. The RCN staff survey in 2017 reported that this is having an impact on the ground, and nurses are reporting that care is going undone as a result. And that is why, as a nurse and as a member of the RCN, I am bringing this bill forward to establish legally enforceable nursing staffing levels in the NHS in England, as was done in Wales in 2016, and as in Scotland in June of this year, where they passed the Hospital and Care Staffing Act. There are four main aims to this bill. Firstly, to make the government accountable for nursing levels in England. Currently, no one is accountable for nursing numbers in England, and that is why we have such a high vacancy rate. No one is responsible and no one is accountable for nursing numbers, and therefore that's why we have a lack of strategic action to address this. How are we going to increase student nursing numbers via degree apprenticeships, which are working so well in places like the University of Brighton near my constituency, where student nurses earn while they learn in clinical placements? Or how are we to increase the numbers returning to practice, when returning to practice courses are difficult to access and expensive, as nurses often have to pay for them themselves? How are we going to address the issue of early retirement, when nearly a third of our nurses in practice today are likely to retire in the next 10 years? Without someone taking responsibility, none of these issues are addressed. And while individual trusts do their best to mitigate for recruitment and retention challenges, no one is taking responsibility for the sheer scale of the issue across England. This fits neatly into the second and third part of the bill, which is around a fully costed workforce strategy and is around nursing numbers. Currently, there are no legally enforceable nursing numbers for any healthcare sector in England. In 2014, NICE guidelines for adult wards stated that when nurse-patient ratios reached 8 patients to 1 nurse, this should act as a red flag that care was becoming unsafe. Yet in the 2017 RCN staff survey, 71% of nurses reported that on their last shift, they cared for more than 8 patients, and 26% reported that they cared for more than 14 patients. We need legally enforceable numbers so nurses and patients can be protected from unsafe care, and that someone is held to account if this doesn't happen. Currently in England, each trust manages their own staffing numbers, and if money is tight, retention and recruitment just doesn't happen. And to be fair to the trust, they have no pool of nurses on which to draw, and what are they supposed to do? And we do need a nursing workforce strategy to meet the needs in the short term, but also to plan for the long-term healthcare needs of the nation. However, this bill is about more than just ring-fencing nursing numbers. It's about skill mix too. Having experienced qualified nurses is the key to improving patient outcomes. As already mentioned, there is a growing body of evidence to show the difference experienced and qualified nurses can make to patient outcomes. And in my experience of 25 years of working as a nurse, nothing can beat that continuity of looking after the same patient over a period of time that only adequate staffing numbers allows for. An experienced nurse can often get to know their patient and can spot those mild changes, such as mild confusion, which could indicate the start of sepsis, that someone isn't taking their medication, that they're slightly dehydrated, or they've got raised sugar levels. Something as simple as constipation can lead to abdominal pain, nausea and vomiting, dehydration, and ultimately hospital admission. Service managers who are driven to replace nurses by healthcare assistants take a penny-wise and pound-foolish approach, as a qualified nurse can prevent hospital admissions, reduce lengths of stay, and reduce readmissions, simply by using their skill and experience. And any extra paid in higher wages is offset by the savings in relation to length of stay and acute adverse events. Finally, the bill wants to legislate to provide training and education for all nurses throughout the length of their career. If we want nurses to take on more advanced roles, from nurse prescribing to chest drain insertion, the government needs to be responsible for ensuring that training happens. This needs to be both in terms of paying for training, but also to allow study leave. We cannot continue with nurses using their annual leave and their days off to undertake training vital to their roles. Other countries have realised the need for change and have made legislative changes to ensure safe staffing levels. And that is why I'm supporting the RCN and Dame Donna Kinnair in bringing this bill forward to create a legal framework that clarifies the roles and responsibilities and accountability for the supply, recruitment and retention for nurses in England.
The honourable member will leave to bring in the bill. The question is that the honourable member have to leave in the bill. As many of them can say aye. Aye. The contrary no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare to bring in the bill?
Alberto Costa, Kate Hoey, Stephen Lloyd, Andrea Jenkins, Andrew Lua, Andrew Griffiths, Lloyd Russell-Moyle, Charlie Elphick, Eddie Hughes and myself.
Maria Colford.
Thank you. Nurse staffing levels bill.
Second reading, what day?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow! Excellent. I don't think there'll be many here, but good luck. With convenience to the House, I'd like to put motions 2 and 3 together, in which case the question is as on the order paper. Sorry, you want to move?
I beg to move.
Okay. So the motion is that moved. The question is to put the two together. The question is as on the order paper. As many of the opinions say aye. Aye. The contrary no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to motion number 4 on the exiting of the European Union, and it is now for Minister Rebecca Poe to move. Minister!
Thank you so much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I beg to move the motion that the House has considered the plant health EU Exit Regulations 2019. These regulations amend earlier EU Exit Regulations relating to plant health to update the Plant Health EU Exit Regulations 2019 and ensure that recent EU-derived protective measures against the introduction and spread of harmful plant pests continue to remain effective and operable on leaving the EU. The Plant Health EU Exit Regulations 2019, which were debated in this House on the 19th of March 2019, are an important element of the EU exit legislation, which we have put in place for maintaining plant biosecurity and set out the list of harmful pests and plant material that will continue to be regulated. It's our responsibility to protect biosecurity across plant and animal health and the wider ecosystem. It's also important that we have a robust process of ongoing review to strengthen biosecurity protections where this is possible and necessary as we leave the EU. The regulations debated today are specifically about protecting plant biosecurity. The amendments they contain address technical deficiencies and inoperability issues, and that, Mr Deputy Speaker, is quite a mouthful, relating to retained EU law on plant health that could arise when we leave the EU. I should make it clear that all the amendments introduced by this instrument are simply technical operability amendments and do not introduce any policy changes. They ensure that existing measures set out in EU legislation and national measures introduced under the EU's Plant Health Directive will continue to apply to the UK as we leave the EU. Of course, I'll give way to my friend.
Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. First of all, can I say what a joy it is to see the Minister in her role and wish her well in that position as well. Over the last period of time, in many of the papers that I have had the chance to read, the issue of alien species coming, whether it be plant life, whether it be animal life, whatever it be, is grown in numbers than they have in the past. So I'm just wondering, Minister, in the legislation that's coming forward, ever mindful that you said it's not a change, does the Minister feel what they have before us can ensure that those alien species, wherever they come from, whether they be in the sea, the land, or in plant life, that we will be able to ensure that they will become a thing of the past rather than something that we have to endure and live with?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and as we all know, it's an area that I have an interest in, and I'd like to give assurances that this government is taking alien species extremely seriously. We do not want effectively invasive species coming into this country, and we will give assurances we're going to have the highest protections and standards as we go forward, as this example today about plant biosecurity will demonstrate, because this is an absolute belt and braces step we're taking today. I want to make the majority of the... Okay, I will give way.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Just a quick question I would like to ask the Minister. Many of us are very concerned about regulated plant material coming in from third countries via the EU. What will happen in terms of the checking? Because many of us are actually very concerned what that could mean in terms of pests and diseases.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Again, the honourable member raises a very good point, and we are setting up the most stringent system and checks. I'll maybe make some more references to that in my summing up at the end, because it is something people are concerned about. But we are revered for our standards on these things already, and indeed we will be strengthening our checks and balances because it's so important to us as an island that we address these things. The majority of the changes being made update the list of regulated plant pests and plant material and associated import and movement requirements relating to host material in the Plant Health EU Exit Regulations to reflect the recent amendments to the list to list the Plant Health Directive made by Commission implementing Directive 2019-523, and as a result of technical changes in the assessment of risks presented by particular pests and diseases. Important changes included are regulating against new threats, and some of those include the lemon tree borer, which affects a great deal more species than lemon trees, so species in this country, and strengthening protections against the tobacco whitefly and the pine processionary moth, for which the UK currently has protected zone status. But in addition, the list is being updated to ensure specific national measures that have been introduced under EU provisions to protect against the rosette virus and the oak processionary moth remain operable after we exit the EU. And I thought I would just say a little bit about those two things, because those are the new things we are really ensuring are going to be protected. So the rosette virus is an extremely damaging disease which will affect our wonderful roses. And it's widespread already in the USA and parts of Canada, where it's had devastating impacts. And it was actually found for the first time in India in 2017. And the virus affects all roses. It is actually, I just finished describing about the horrific effects of this virus, if the member doesn't mind. The virus affects all roses, and it's mite vector, and it might be present in the plants and plant parts. And current EU regulations restrict the imports of plants for planting from non-EU countries, so it restricts plants which are dormant, free from leaves, free from flowers and fruits. But this is not sufficient, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to prevent the entry of this devastating virus, which is why we introduced national protections, which we want to retain into the future. And can you imagine, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if this got a hold in our gardens, where we love and revere our roses so much? It would have a terrible impact, as it would to our very high-quality rose breeders and the whole of that industry. So this is extremely serious. And interestingly, the EU is now following our lead and is going to copy what we're doing here. So I think that sets us up as leaders. So I will just give way there quickly.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and can I welcome her to her new position. Can she give me an example of what I would call, and do we have, an early warning system so that we get on top of those diseases as soon as possible? Can she give me an example?
Thank you for that intervention, which leads me very neatly onto the other thing that we are protecting. I'm just going to carry on and answer this question, because the oak processionary moth is native to southern Europe, and its caterpillars eat the leaves of oak trees, affecting the health of the trees, as well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as these caterpillars shed poisonous hairs, which can cause adverse reactions in humans. And the majority of the UK is designated as a protection zone against this damaging pest, and it is established in many parts of Europe, and there has been an expansion of its distribution recently, including in the UK, where some cases were found earlier this year. But fortunately, the government took rapid action, and this is to the point just raised by the member, because we have a very good system in place. We, first of all, strengthened the existing national protections against this pest, tightening import requirements, and the Forestry Commission and the Animal and Plant Health Agency took really swift action to eradicate any signs of the moth, its larvae, its caterpillars, but also to swing into action an excellent surveillance system, tracing lots of work tracing these creatures and destroying the caterpillars, and indeed infested and related trees. And all the infested trees were intercepted in the protection zone, and they've all, any signs of both the moth but the trees that were attacked with the moth have been destroyed. And it is important that we ensure continued operability of these strengthened import requirements to ensure protection on an ongoing basis. And that's why we're including this today. And I'll give way quickly to the honourable member.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thank the Minister for giving way. And she's given a very full and interesting answer. Global warming is upon us, and of course, as global warming proceeds, various species of both animals and flowers are migrating ever northwards in the British Isles and across Europe. Can I make a plea to the Minister that our scientists and our experts at Oxford, Cambridge, Edinburgh, St Andrews are being consulted as to what dangerous species might be tempted north, even into my constituency, by what is happening in the world?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and it's something that is very much on the radar of this government. Indeed, DEFRA are really strong in this area and working constantly to see what new threats might be coming in and out of the country. And it's really important, as I say, being an island nation, that we are really on the ball with this. Indeed, we are going to remain part of the European Plant Protection Organisation, which involves many more countries, European countries, but many others as well, and they're all working towards this aim. I'm going to press on because I know we're slightly tight for time. The instrument today also amends primary legislation to remove references to EU obligations. These changes have no operational impact, but simply remove redundant and inoperable references to EU obligations. The devolved administrations have provided their consent to make these changes for the whole of the UK, which I think already intercepts the question I was going to get. Regulation 2 of this instrument applies to Great Britain, and Regulation 3 applies to Northern Ireland, and Regulations 4 and 5 apply to England, Wales and Northern Ireland. The purpose of this instrument, then, to sum up, is to ensure that an operable legal framework is in place on EU exit day and to facilitate the flow of goods while preserving the current plant health regime's overall aim of preventing and managing pest and disease threats. For these reasons, Mr Deputy Speaker, I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper, and can I welcome Shadow Minister Luke Pollard to his position.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I welcome the new Minister to her place. As a South West MP, it's good to see a South West combo on both sides of the dispatch box, and good to see that she's in a position of responsibility where she will be able to use her considerable knowledge, in particular an area that she knows that I feel strongly about, as does she, about soil health as well. And soil health is kind of related tangentially to plant health here, and so I would just like to start by saying that the opposition does not oppose this statutory instrument today, so we won't be opposing it. However, we are grateful that the government has chosen to correct mistakes and omissions in previous SIs in relation to this. Once again, with the plant health regulations, what we're here to do is make amendments to amendments because the previous amendments fell short of what was required at the time. Regular watchers of these SI debates on parliamentlive.tv, and I'm sure there are many of them, will know of the concerns shared by my honourable friends, the members for Stroud, for Workington and for Ipswich, the Shadow DEFRA team, that these SIs are sometimes being rushed through and mistakes or gremlins, as I call them, can be baked into them, not only in the work of the officials, but also in the lack of time for proper scrutiny within the House by members, but also by stakeholders as well. And this SI, I think, confirms just that rushed legislation being pushed through will then need to be amended further in the future because there are omissions at the time. And that creates the potential for a polluted statute book, which I think is something that we would all want to avoid, especially in an area as important and as technically detailed as plant health. Indeed, my honourable friend for Ipswich said on the 19th of March, when this regulation was last considered, I confidently predict there will be mistakes, perhaps not in these particular SIs, but in some of them, and they will have serious consequences for our residents and businesses over and above the massive overarching mistake which is the government's handling of Brexit. Now, ignoring the bigger Brexit position that my honourable friend was talking about, I think it is important that we state that when the government does find errors and omissions in SIs, as here, I support the government bringing amendments to those SIs to the Chamber, and that's why we're not opposing this one today. I'm grateful for the Minister setting out in a tongue twister of a statement that she had to say that there were technical deficiencies and inoperabilities with this regulation in the past. This was not on her bailiwick at the time when this was first done, but I think it was in the flood of statutory instruments being proposed by her department in the lead up to one of the early exit days to push through as many as possible, and at the time the opposition raised concerns about how comprehensive those SIs will be. Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to briefly turn to the explanatory memorandum because it's just as important sometimes as the regulations themselves. It suggests, even implicitly, that this is a mere updating of the last SI with new regulation. However, in reality, if we take one example, the EU Commission implementing decision of 2018-1959, which concerns the preventing Agrillus panipennis being introduced into the EU, was passed on the 10th of December 2018. The Agrilis Planopennis is incredibly damaging to the European ash trees, and so the government is correct to legislate against the introduction of this to the UK and put in places to protect our own trees because of it. My question is, why was this not implemented when we last considered this area here? And can the Minister just explain to the House what process her department is taking to look at the statutory instruments that have been passed by Parliament to check that there were no omissions, especially in that real surge period of statutory instruments that we saw in February, March of this year, before one of the early exit days. The previous SI, which this one amends, was needed to correct errors and omissions in the Plant Health EU exit regulations. Does the Minister concur with our assessment that the process that was followed in some of those was unsatisfactory and that improvements to the process could be made? And if the Minister does agree with that, can she set out how her department is addressing that? Because I think there is cross-party agreement that getting this right is important, but sometimes getting things that are very technically right can take a few goes. But we want to make sure that the system the Minister is using is as robust as possible. The Minister may know one of my penchants in the statutory instruments is to look at the impact assessments, and I am not going to disappoint anyone who is concerned about the impact assessment on this one. I am not a fan of the phrase that there is no or no significant impact in impact assessments in explanatory memorandums. No and no significant impacts are two very different things. No impact suggests that there is no change to it, and no significant impact suggests there is, but you haven't measured it. Again, in this case here, no impact assessment has been taken to understand where there is an impact by this or not. And I would encourage the Minister, as I have done every one of her predecessors in her role, to work with the House authorities and the Leader of the House to correct that language, because I think there is a difference between no and no significant impact, and especially as we're seeing with this SI, that is a correction of the previous SI that corrected regulations. We need to be getting this right. I just briefly want to now turn to biosecurity and Northern Ireland and in relation to customs. The Minister set out in her opening remarks about the territorial application of this SI, and it affects different parts of the UK differently for different parts. Given the volume of UK-EU trade, especially across the Ireland-Northern Ireland border, which we hope will not be diminished as a result of any of the Brexit arrangements her government is pursuing, the current system for sharing biosecurity intelligence with EU countries risks being lost if there's not an agreement to make sure that information sharing takes place. Now, what we've seen in the last few days is a potential threat to information sharing between the UK and our EU friends as part of posturing around the Brexit deal negotiations. Can the Minister set out clearly for the House here that information sharing in relation to biosecurity and plant health security, especially around invasive species, will not be affected by any posturing that comes from Downing Street, and that this regulation includes the ability to share properly the information that we need between ourselves and our EU friends. Now, the Minister's predecessor referred in the previous Plant Health SI committee to contingency plans to develop a database to capture interceptions and incursions and share information with the European Union where those incursions have been recorded. Can I ask if that database is ready? If not, how long after the proposed exit day, and let's for the sake of argument assume it's the 31st of October, although I suspect many of us think it's not, how long after that exit day will it be ready, and how many interceptions and incursions does the Minister anticipate the system recording, and what action will be taken to contain them as they are identified? The House of Lords EU Committee report said the need to facilitate trade post-Brexit must not be allowed to compromise the UK's biosecurity, probably something that everyone on this, on all sides of the House would agree with. So can I ask the Minister how her department will guarantee that we face no increased biosecurity risks and maintain alignment with the EU, especially in data sharing, in any Brexit arrangements? The plant health regulations set up lists for England, Wales and Northern Ireland that seek to replicate the current set of EU lists that are in relation to plant health. They can ensure that protected zones can continue to be protected from pests and that emergency measures can continue to be applied where necessary. However, a large raft of the EU legislation that accompanied those lists is proposing being revoked. Can I just check in with the Minister that as mistakes have been identified in the previous SI, that it's still the Minister's intention to revoke those parts of EU regulation to make sure that there was no errors in the emissions in that respect. Now, my honourable friend from Clwyd South mentioned that the EU Plant Health Directive requires checks on material imported from third countries at the first point of entry into the EU. However, once we've left the EU, and if that happens, the intention is to allow plant material from third countries to pass straight through the EU without checking, to enter the EU without checking at the border, and to rely on checks at the destination premises of the importers. Can I ask the government ask the Minister how she intends to ensure that all plant material brought into this country in that manner from third countries without checks will actually be checked? Because it is important that we ensure that there's no invasive species, pests or diseases on those containments of plants that can escape into our natural environment. And as the Minister set out in her speech, there's a number of different pests and diseases that can affect UK species that we would want to seek to avoid. And especially as we see the effects of climate change, with changes in our own climate, the amount of diseases and pests that can thrive in the UK environment has changed from previous years when regulations around pests were first introduced. I know that this is the Minister's first outing, so I would apologise for the large amount of questions that I fired on her, by this one here. There is cross-party support for robust biosecurity in relation to plant health. And finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, for those members who have not yet collected their tree, Extinction Rebellion are providing a free tree to every member in New Palace Yard. I've been out to collect my tree. I got an English oak with my name on it, and in fact I walked past the Minister's tree that is sitting out there for her to collect, I'm sure, in a bit. Ensuring that we have a robust set of plant health and biosecurity for our natural habitat, especially the native species that Extinction Rebellion are giving out as an example, is going to be very important whether we remain in the European Union or not, because we need to make sure we have robust systems in place. I'll be grateful if the Minister could address a few of those questions when she comes to take her place at the dispatch box shortly. Thank you.
Neil Parish.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and can I also welcome the Minister very much to her new place, because she's very much my neighbour, a great member of the Select Committee in the past, and I look forward to great work from the Minister. Can I also echo what the Shadow Minister has said, that there are trees out there waiting for us to collect. I've also collected an oak tree. Let's see if the soil in Tiverton is better than the soil in Plymouth, and we'll see how fast the trees grow and how much carbon they capture. But my point on this is that, as the Minister will well know, that the ash dieback, and I'm not so good on Latin as the Shadow Minister, but ash dieback was very much introduced in this country, we believe, by taking seed over to the Netherlands, actually growing it in the Netherlands, and then bringing those trees back. And so, therefore, we can actually make Britain a bastion of trees that are not diseased. And so, everything we can do to make sure that as we import trees into this country, they are healthy, and we actually grow many more of our own. And I think there could be a real benefit to this SI, but let's make sure we actually get it right. But again, I welcome her to her new role.
Bye-bye.
John McDonnell.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I too welcome the Minister to her front bench position, and I absolutely acknowledge her in-depth knowledge of the subject. The Minister will know that the Scottish National Party, the Scottish Government, has made plant health a priority, and I would be grateful if the present Government state fully and frankly which standards, if any, it intends to alter and whether plant health is to be targeted. As you know, plant health is at the heart of Scotland's thriving natural environment, our rural economy and our well-being. However, there are increasing pest and disease threats to our plant health, particularly through increased globalisation of trade and other factors such as climate change. The aim of the Scottish Plant Health Strategy is to safeguard agriculture, horticulture, forestry and the wider environment from plant pests 2016-21 and beyond. Mr Deputy Speaker, this strategy will require an integrated approach to ensure effective collaboration between all interested parties. The approach builds upon the work already undertaken by the Scottish Plant Health Service, but recognises that government alone cannot tackle current and future plant health challenges, and so has a focus on working in partnership with others to build and strengthen relationships. It sets out how together we can protect crops, trees and other plants from new and existing pests and diseases. This also underpins the development of the economic potential of the Scottish agricultural, horticultural, forestry and land use and food and drink sectors, which in turn enhances the production, efficiency, protects the natural environment, including amenity sites, gardens, and maintains wholesome environments for rest and relaxation. And it's my job here, as well as my fellow SNP members, to make sure that the powers devolved to Scotland are protected and not taken back to Westminster. And that would prohibit these ambitions that we share. Mr Deputy Speaker, Scotland's rich and diverse natural environment is a valuable national asset. Its continued health and enhancement is vital for all our health, well-being and for sustainable economic growth. In Scotland, we have the largest green space project in Europe, the Central Scotland Green Network. This network receives and welcomes some 25 million tourist visits per year, generating around £63 million for the Scottish economy. And in my own constituency of Falkirk, I witnessed local people enjoying the ambitions of the Scottish Government and visions to enable, achieve and deliver a happier, more active lifestyle, particularly through the active travel hub plan, the walking and cycling that everybody seems to enjoy within that particular area, and connecting, for example, the magnificent Kelpies to the Falkirk Stadium, along the canal paths to the world-famous Falkirk Wheel and, of course, the Antonine Wall, a World Heritage Site. Mr Deputy Speaker, local people from all over Scotland, the rest of the UK, walk, cycle, use the canal boats alongside people from visitors from all over the world and from Europe, all enjoying each other's company, and long may this continue. Mr Deputy Speaker, for your information, Scotland was the first country in Europe to implement a land use strategy. This allows our strategic approach for land use to account for the full range of benefits our land resources provide. For example, Scotland created 73% of all new woodland in the UK in 1617. And furthermore, Scotland's new target of 15,000 hectares per year from 24-25 is both ambitious and it is achievable. The Scottish Government's 2017-18 programme for government has been described by no less a person than Richard Dixon, Friends of the Earth Scotland, as the greenest in the history of the Scottish Parliament. Mr Deputy Speaker, the EU has provided significant funding for Scotland's biodiversity. The EU nature policy and the legislation is effective, ambitious, far-reaching, robust, consistent and well enforced. This EU-wide implementation allows it to function at a supranational spatial scale, thereby acknowledging that nature doesn't observe national boundaries and completely recognises the importance of promoting habitat connectivity that allows biodiversity to thrive and adapt in response to anthropogenic pressures such as habitat fragmentation and climate change. Mr Deputy Speaker, regulations on animal and plant health, food safety remain absolutely essential for Scotland's reputation to access EU and other international markets. Mr Deputy Speaker, these regulations are vital to ensure certainty of policy for Scotland's future, must be respected and remain in the Scottish Government's powers.
Hear, hear. Minister.
Mr Deputy Speaker. And I would very much like to thank all honourable members and friends who have contributed to this debate. Indeed, there are a great more interventions than one might have expected, which I am heartened to hear that so many people are interested in plants and our biosecurity. It's extremely important to all of us in so many ways. And I particularly want to thank the Shadow Minister for kindly welcoming me to my place. And yeah, we're going to be a southwest stronghold. And I'm very delighted and thank you for supporting today. I also very much want to thank the Chairman of the Select Committee for his kind words, and indeed our SNP spokesperson, with whom I had so many enjoyable times on the Environmental Audit Select Committee. And working together on these things is important. In order to prepare for the UK leaving the EU, it is essential that we have the right legislation in place to continue to protect plant biosecurity, whilst of course facilitating the trade and movement of plants and plant material around the world. We have a great many plants coming into the UK, but equally we export a great many plants.
Marvellous contributions. Thank you. I think we should certainly now move on to the general debate on baby loss awareness. I call Minister Caroline Dynage to move.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move that this House considers Baby Loss Awareness Week. This is the 4th Baby Loss Awareness Week debate, and it is incredibly heartening to me to see how this has become an annual event here in this House, because I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, it helps to send out a very clear message, a very clear signal outside of this place about the importance of this subject, both within these chambers, within the Department of Health and Social Care, and within the National Health Service. Over the years, many members of Parliament have been brave enough to share their own personal and painful accounts of baby loss, which, while so heartbreaking to hear, has done so much to raise the profile and start vital conversations around this important issue. And it's absolutely right, and it's fundamentally important that we continue to raise awareness of the devastating impact of baby loss and of the support that bereaved parents need, both through the grieving process and to help them towards adjusting to their loss, because I don't think people ever fully heal or get over the loss of a much loved and much wanted child. But with the right care and support, they may be able slowly to move forward with their lives.
Giving way, and I identify myself with everything she's said so far. One of the experiences for members of the public who have not experienced baby loss, and some of the members in here, is what we actually learn about it. The heartbreak, the lack of support in some instances. In general terms, it's been very good to have these debates, and even if we do have them annually, because it educates the public about an issue that sometimes has been too often shoved under the carpet, for want of a better term. So it's better now that people understand what people go through in life. So I do appreciate the Honourable Lady's opening remarks.
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman so much for that intervention, and he's absolutely right. I think in this place we do have a unique opportunity to be able to raise the subjects that actually people find very difficult to talk about out there, but in doing so we shine a light on those subjects, and we're able to really begin to move the dial and to change practice. And I think with this in mind, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to start really by paying tribute to the member for Edisbury and the member for Colchester, who I know is desperate to speak, but being a minister is now prevented from doing so, so we're going to have to restrain him today, Madam Deputy Speaker. But in a late night adjournment back in 2015, they began to raise the awareness of the variation in care for families bereaved by baby loss. And this was an incredibly moving debate. I remember listening to it at the time, but it really made such a magnificent difference. And it was followed by the Baby Loss Awareness Week debate in 2016, which was very much about bringing the subject to light and challenging the idea that baby loss is an uncomfortable topic that we don't like to talk about. And I'm really grateful to members across this House who have shared their personal experiences, who did on that day back in 2016 and have done since. International Baby Loss Awareness Week begins tomorrow, the 9th of October, and finishes next Tuesday. This year, the focus is on the need for specialist psychological support for those bereaved parents who need it. The Baby Loss Awareness Alliance group of charities will be publishing a report highlighting the need by some parents for this kind of support as part of their bereavement care.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I wholeheartedly support the absolute thrust of this debate, in particular what the Minister is saying to us. I'm not going to take part in this debate. I did last year, but when a child is lost, and this has affected my family, as members know, counselling and gynecological advice is hugely important, as I think we all agree on. The issue I have is that my constituents are over 100 miles from the nearest hospital where you can give birth. And I just put this on the record, that a 200-mile round trip from Caithness to Inverness makes the counselling and the gynecological advice so difficult. And I just say for the record, my constituents are losing out on this front, and I do wish that Caithness General Hospital and Wick could be used for these purposes. I'm deliberately putting this down.
Very grateful for him raising that issue, and it is a particularly difficult issue for rural communities where people live a very long way from services. As we set out in the NHS long-term plan, maternity outreach clinics are going to be beginning to integrate maternity, reproductive health and psychological therapy for women experiencing mental health difficulties arising from or related to maternity experience. And I think we do have to keep in mind those who are living in very remote communities when we talk about those outreach facilities. I'll give way.
Thank you for giving way. This is such an important topic, and while she's on the subject of outreach clinics, can I also commend to her the need for us to have maternity bereavement suites within maternity suites. I'm very proud to have helped secure £22,500 for the new facility at Scunthorpe Hospital, which has only just opened over the summer, and I pay tribute to the Health Tree Foundation for securing this £175,000 project. But it's taken years, and for the first time we now have a bereavement suite where parents who have had a stillbirth can spend time with their other children, with the baby, on the ward, in that maternity suite, as other young mums and dads are doing. It's a really important part of the healing process, and really it's frankly, it shouldn't be the case that this isn't normal throughout all of our maternity suites. So perhaps as we mark Baby Loss Awareness Week, this is something perhaps the government could look at for the country as a whole.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm really grateful to my honourable friend for raising this. I think he's absolutely right. I do think it's something we need to give a lot more attention to. It's going to have to be an incredibly valuable, important part of the process of grieving and coming to terms with the death of the unbelievably tragic death of a baby, to have that ability to spend that time together. And I think he's absolutely right to put that on the record. Honourable Gentleman.
I'm grateful to the Minister. She's been very generous. On the question of raising awareness and the job that was so ably started by honourable colleagues, she'll be aware of my Civil Partnerships, Marriages and Deaths Registration Act, which became law in May, and two parts of that Act are to do with stillbirth. One, giving the Secretary of State the power to have coroners investigate stillbirths for the first time, and secondly, the review set up by the Secretary of State for Health to look into the registration of pre-24-week stillbirths. That review hasn't met for over a year, and can she update us on progress on when the legislation will be laid so that coroners, for the first time, will have the power and ability to investigate stillbirths where they seem fit to do so?
Minister. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm really grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for raising this, actually, because I think that was a really important private member's bill that he brought forward. The consultation concluded on the 18th of June, and there were a very large number of responses, over 350 responses to it, and officials are currently analysing all of those responses and will revert as soon as possible on that. Madam Deputy Speaker, much has been achieved since 2015 to improve the quality of bereavement care for parents, and I would like to put on record the efforts of the all-party parliamentary group on baby loss in this matter, ably led by my honourable friend, but with support from members across the House. And I will come on to speak about developments in bereavement care more in a moment, but first I'd like to talk about some of the progress that's been made by the NHS in improving safety and reducing baby loss in maternity and neonatal services. I can't move on any further at this point without putting on record my enormous thanks and gratitude in this space to my right honourable friend, the Member of Parliament for South West Surrey, who I think has done more to further the cause of patient safety, but investigating untimely deaths of babies, but also across the NHS than anybody, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to thank him from all of us, I think, for the incredible work that he's done in that space. Members will be aware of the government's ambition to halve the rates of stillbirth and neonatal deaths by 2025, with an interim ambition to achieve a 20% reduction in these rates by 2020. The ambition also includes similar reductions in maternal mortality and serious brain injuries in babies occurring during or soon after birth, and a 25% reduction in the preterm birth rate from the current 8% to 6% by 2025. This ambition was set in November 2015 when the Lancet Stillbirth series ranked the UK 33rd out of 35 high-income countries for stillbirths. Case reviews of stillbirths and neonatal deaths suggested that many such deaths might have been prevented through better clinical care, and the Morecambe Bay investigation report made 44 recommendations for improving the safety of maternity services. In 2016 and 2017, the Department of Health launched a range of initiatives that are being delivered by the NHS under the auspices of the Maternity Transformation Programme, and I'd like to mention a few of those achievements. Every NHS trust with maternity services now has a board which includes obstetric and midwifery safety champions in place, leading the development of an organisation safety culture. Every trust received a share of the £8.1 million maternity safety training fund. 30,945 training places for multidisciplinary teams were delivered in 2018-19. Courses focusing on training for childbirth emergencies in labour wards and in the community, as well as leadership and communication and resilience. An evaluation of the Saving Babies' Lives care bundle found that clinical improvements such as better monitoring of a baby's growth and movement in pregnancy, as well as better monitoring in labour, meant that maternity staff have helped save more than 160 babies' lives across 19 maternity units. An estimated 600 stillbirths annually, though, could be prevented if all maternity units adopted national best practice. A revised version of that care bundle is currently being rolled out across England, and the new version includes elements to reduce the number of preterm births and optimise care where preterm delivery cannot be prevented. I will.
Thank you very much. Firstly, can I say to myself, with the very positive words you were saying about our right honourable friend, the member for South West Surrey, and all that he did to improve patient safety within the NHS, it was a fantastic piece of work. I'd like to raise with the Minister an issue raised with me by Mr and Mrs Pickup of Knaresborough, who have suffered significant personal loss but are seeking to drive change to ensure that no other family has to face the tragedy that they have had to. The issue is the automatic sharing of medical records between trusts and the process used within the NHS to ensure this happens. This has not always worked very smoothly, so will my honourable friend please consider this matter as she works to improve patient safety across the NHS?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and my honourable friend is right to raise this. I think that when there are tragedies that could be avoidable by something as simple as sharing records, patient records, it seems to me that there is no option but to embrace the sort of technology we need that's going to be able to make that a reality. I know the previous Secretary of State for Health and indeed the current one are very much in favour of that. But also every trust is now using the perinatal mortality review tool to review cases of stillbirths and neonatal deaths and to make sure that the lessons are learned from those deaths, to make sure that other families don't have to suffer in the same way. And the first annual MRT report is due for publication later this week, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it will provide an analysis of the first 1,500 cases. Overall, a review has been completed on 96% of stillbirths and 86% of neonatal deaths since the tool was launched. I will.
Madam President, I do honestly and earnestly thank the Minister for giving me a second time. She talks about safety advice and safety good practice. Could I please ask her and the UK Government to share this advice with NHS Highland and indeed the Scottish Government, who have never, in my 2 and X months presence here, have ever given me a straight answer on the safety of pregnant mothers, some of whom might be in labour, being transported over 100 miles from Caithness to Regmore Hospital in Inverness in the middle of winter when the A9 can block. I think lives are in danger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, the honourable gentleman has put his thoughts very clearly on the record today, and if there's anything we can ever do to share best practice with colleagues across the devolved nations, but also around the rest of the world, we are always very happy to do that. The Healthcare Safety Investigation Branch is another remarkable innovation, Madam Deputy Speaker, which commenced investigations in April 2018, and they've been operational in 130 trusts, providing maternity services since the end of March 2019. And by the end of August, they'd completed 88 investigations with 169 draft reports, currently with trusts and families looking into the maternity neonatal deaths. NHS Resolution recently published a report on the first year of its early notification scheme for potential birth brain injuries. The scheme requires all births at NHS trusts in England from the 1st of April 2017 meeting qualifying criteria to be reported to NHS Resolution within 30 days for investigations. Families with a baby affected by severe brain injury that is attributable to substandard care are able to receive significantly earlier answers to their questions. It also means that they don't have to resort to full court proceedings, and they are able to receive financial support with their care and other needs at a much earlier stage. In the first year, 746 incidents were eligible for the EN scheme. There have been early admissions of liability for 24 families, Madam Deputy Speaker, who've been provided with a detailed explanation, admissions of liability, and very importantly, an apology. Families have been provided with financial support for easy access to additional care and respite where they need it, psychological support and indeed counselling. I'm happy to report that this summer the Office for National Statistics reported that stillbirth rate in England had decreased from 5.1 stillbirths per thousand in 2010 to 4 stillbirths per thousand in 2018. I will in one moment, and this represents a 21% reduction in stillbirths 2 years ahead of the ambition plan.
I would thank the Minister very much for giving way and thank her for Baby Awareness Week and her statement. Just really to reiterate, many mothers always want to give natural childbirth, and that is essential if they can. But we also need to make sure the facilities are there in all of our maternity units to be able to act if natural childbirth doesn't take place, so we can actually get deliver the baby, hopefully, without any brain injury.
Yes, I think he's absolutely right, and so much of what the government's been working on in recent years, Madam Deputy Speaker, is all about that, making sure we have the right facilities, the right skills and the right knowledge right across our NHS estate. Now, I just wanted to reiterate what I just mentioned a moment ago, which is that we have seen a 21% reduction in stillbirth, and that is 2 years ahead of our ambitious plans, Madam Deputy Speaker. And of course, every stillbirth is an absolute tragedy, but I'm sure the House will want to join me in paying tribute to the midwives, to the obstetricians, to other members of the multidisciplinary maternity and neonatal teams across the NHS for embracing that maternity safety ambition that we set, and their incredible hard work for achieving this milestone 2 years ahead of target. I think it's really quite remarkable. However, of course, there's absolutely no room for any complacency whatsoever, because there is so much more to do, and many members will be aware that the neonatal mortality review rate in 2017 was only 4.6% lower than it was in 2010. And that headline figure hides that the ONS data showing the number of live births at very low gestational ages, most of whom die very soon after birth, increased significantly between 2014 and 2017. In fact, the neonatal mortality rate in babies born at term was, that is at least 37 weeks gestation, actually decreased by 19%. And the stillbirth rate in term babies decreased by 31.6% between 2010 and 2018, but the preterm birth rate remains 8%, and clearly achieving our ambition depends significantly on reducing those preterm births, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will.
Grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way, and I apologise to her and the House for missing the early part of her remarks. Just on the statistics that she has commented on now, isn't it the case that actually we're going backwards in terms of progress on neonatal deaths? And is it not also true that there is a marked difference in more socially deprived areas since 2014? And does that not suggest that actually more investment, significantly more investment is needed urgently in this area, in particular in those areas where social deprivation is most stark?
Madam Deputy Speaker, he's right in saying that we are still going forwards, although nowhere near as quickly as we would want to be, and there have been some backward steps along the way. A lot of the changes that we have introduced actually haven't yet had the opportunity to take full effect, and I'm hopeful that as we move forward we'll begin to see those neonatal death rates reduce. As I've just mentioned, actually when babies are born at full term or close to full term, the rate has dropped significantly, but it's those preterm births that are causing a lot of concern for us, and that's why we're putting this continued effort in to this issue. And that's why in the long-term plan, Madam Deputy Speaker, that was published in January, the NHS committed to accelerate action to achieve the national maternity safety ambition. Maternity services will be supported to fully implement an expanded Saving Babies' Lives care bundle across every maternity unit by 2020 in England. The development of specialist preterm birth clinics will be encouraged in England as well, which should very much help. NHS England and NHS Improvement will continue to work with midwives, with mothers, with families to implement continuity of carer, so that by March 2021 most women have a named individual caring for them during pregnancy, during birth and postnatally, and this will help reduce preterm birth, hospital admissions, the need for intervention during labour, and also improve women's experiences of care. Returning to that bereavement care, members will be aware that for 3 years the Department of Health and Social Care has provided funding to SANS charity to work collaboratively with other baby loss charities and the NHS to develop and pilot a rollout of a standardised national bereavement care pathway for parents who've experienced baby loss, whether this is through miscarriage or through a termination after receiving a diagnosis of a fetal abnormality, or stillbirth or neonatal death, or indeed sudden infant death. And the pathway sets out 9 standards for good bereavement care and has been adopted so far by 40 trusts, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I hope that many, many more will follow. Bereaved parents, I will give way.
I'm very grateful for the Minister giving way, and I was contacted by one of my constituents, and her baby died in July at 26 days, and she still now has been unable to get counselling support. So will the Minister look to actually give clear guidance to CCGs to make sure that the NICE guidance on bereavement is there for everyone?
Minister. Yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, that guidance is there, and my heart goes out to her constituent. If she wants to get in touch with us about any sort of lacks of access to that kind of care and support, we'll almost certainly be able to help look at it for her. The other thing, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that bereaved parents need time to grieve, and I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the Member of Parliament for Thirsk and Moulton. I don't know if I don't think he is, but he had this fantastic private members bill last year, and as a result from 2020 the Parental Leave and Pay Act will give all employed parents a day one right to 2 weeks leave, even if they lose a child under the age of 18 or suffer a stillbirth from 24 weeks of pregnancy. Finally, in the long-term plan, the NHS commits to improve access to and the quality of perinatal mental health care for mothers, their partners and children by increasing access to evidence-based care for women with moderate to severe perinatal mental health difficulties and personality disorder diagnosis. We also want to increase access to evidence-based psychological support and therapy, including digital options in a maternity setting, developing maternity outreach clinics, as I've already mentioned, that will integrate maternity, reproductive health, psychological therapy for women experiencing mental health difficulties directly arising from or related to their maternity experience. So really, in conclusion, the government and NHS is fully committed to reducing the number of babies who die during pregnancy or in the neonatal period, and to providing that absolutely fundamental and much needed support for bereaved families.
The question is that this House has considered Baby Loss Awareness Week. Shadow Minister Julie Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a privilege to have the opportunity to speak in this debate that marks the 18th UK Baby Loss Awareness Week and the 4th debate in this place on this subject. And I join with the Minister in hoping that this will continue to be an annual event here. It is a really important subject that we need to focus on. I also welcome her early comments on efforts to focus on prevention of this and to improve examples of good practice and share that and to learn from mistakes. And I would also like to put on record my thanks to midwives and obstetricians across the country who do so much to deliver safe babies. As a mum and a grandma, I can say that anyone who has ever known the joy of conceiving and giving birth to a child, the joy of watching that child grow and thrive, knows how precious this is. And the very thought of losing that is something too painful to even contemplate. But the fact is, though, every single day there are 650 miscarriages in the UK. That means that every single day 650 women and their partners and families experience the most devastating loss. Every day in the UK, 9 babies are stillborn. This means that 3,168 mums-to-be never get to keep the child that they have carried and loved for 9 months. For every 1,000 babies born between 2 and 3 will die before they're 28 days old. This is the equivalent of 2,131 babies every year. And somehow these parents have to find a way to go on. Baby Loss Awareness Week is about raising awareness of their suffering, and it's so important. But it's also about finding ways to support. It's also about highlighting the need for good care following a bereavement or miscarriage. This week, bereaved parents, their families and friends will unite with each other and others across the world to commemorate the lives of babies who died during pregnancy, at or soon after birth and in infancy. I want to pay tribute to Baby Loss Awareness Alliance members. There are too many to mention individually, but the incredible charities and organisations that are working together for change and tangible improvements in policy, research, bereavement care and support available for anyone affected by the death of a baby at any stage. I want to thank them for the work that they do. I want to thank them for reminding us that first and foremost this week is about remembrance. The campaign to break the silence is crucially important because miscarriage, stillbirth, infant death must not somehow become a guilty secret never to be told. The memories are painful but precious, and the sharing of experiences with others is important. Many parents affected describe feelings of isolation, extreme sadness, anger, and sometimes guilt. They need their experience to be listened to, acknowledged, because the loss of life matters and will always matter. This week is also about raising awareness about pregnancy and baby loss in the UK, and crucially, it's a call for action. I want to commend the excellent Out of Sight, Out of Mind report published today. This report is a call for mental health care for bereaved parents. Too often they fall through the gaps of provision. The report illustrates a system that is at best insensitive and at worst totally inadequate. It's really hard to believe that anyone could ever think it was appropriate for psychological support to be offered to a parent who has lost a baby on a neonatal ward with other people's babies present. I was staggered to read also in the report of a bereaved parent turned away from bereavement counselling because they had not lost a loved one. We must do better. A survey carried out this year found that 60% of bereaved parents felt they needed specialist psychological support for their mental health, but were not able to access it on the NHS. It has long been recognised that women who experience a stillbirth or neonatal death are 4 times more likely to have depression and 7 times more likely to have post-traumatic stress disorder. And yet currently, whilst there are pockets of good practice, too often provision is inadequate, reliant on a postcode lottery, and parents in need are falling through the gaps. This report is a call for the UK Government to act to ensure that all parents who experience pregnancy and baby loss who need specialist psychological support can access it at a time and place that is right for them, free of charge wherever they live. I also want to put on record my thanks to members on both sides of this House who have, on other occasions, shared their very personal, painful experiences of loss. I want to recognise the sterling work of the APPG on baby loss. And finally, but by no means least, I want to recognise and thank my honourable friend, the member for Swansea East, for a powerful campaign that led to the establishment of the Children's Bereavement Fund. I hope today that on both sides of this House that we can together acknowledge that we have heard the call for action and that most importantly guarantee we will act. 2020, I want to be standing here thanking government for their achievements in this field. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Jeremy Hunt.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is a great privilege to speak for the first time for the backbenches
for over a decade, following two extremely powerful speeches from both sides on the front bench. And I want to thank both the Minister of State and the Shadow Minister for two extremely compassionate, understanding speeches that talked about the sheer pain felt by so many families up and down the country. And I also want to thank the many honourable members on all sides, the honourable member for Eddisbury, for Colchester, for Banbury, for Washington and Sunderland West, and many others who have spoken so powerfully on this matter. And I cannot possibly compete with the power of their words, because there is nothing anyone can suffer more than the loss of a child. But I just want to make one observation from my many years, some would say too long years, as Health Secretary with respect to this issue, and that is the impact on professionals. Because when you go around hospitals up and down the country and you ask the doctors, nurses and midwives what is the most traumatic thing that has ever happened to you in your professional career, almost invariably they will say it's when they lose a baby. And we often talk about the trauma for the families, and of course they are the primary victims in this situation. But we must never forget what are sometimes called the second victims, which are those doctors, nurses, midwives, professionals, who have to go home worrying that maybe if they'd done something differently, that baby might still be alive, who have to come back to work the next day, struggle on dealing with that incredible trauma. And in that situation, those professionals want nothing more than to be completely open and transparent and honest with the families, with their colleagues, about what happened, to make sure that lessons are learned and that that tragedy is never repeated again. But Madam Deputy Speaker, in the NHS today, we make that practically impossible. People are terrified about the NMC, the GMC, the CQC, their trust. They're worried about being fired. They're worried about all sorts of consequences. And so the one thing that should happen, the one thing that everyone in that situation wants to happen more than anything else, which is that lessons are learned from that tragedy, is often the one thing that never happens at all. And let's remember, as the Shadow Minister said, we have 1,400 neonatal deaths every year. So that's about 4 every single day across the NHS. And the great tragedy, not just in the NHS, but in hospitals all over the world, is the fact that you can have a tragedy that could happen in Blackpool one day, and a month later exactly the same tragedy happening in Cornwall. And there has been not enough effort to try and share the learnings from those tragedies. And I want to commend the efforts of the government and my successor ministers for doing everything they possibly can to put this right and to make sure we really do become a learning organisation. But in truth, this is a very big job that is going to take a very long time, because it is in the end about changing culture. And we need, as the NHS, to look at other industries that have successfully changed their culture from a blame culture to a learning culture. The airline industry is the most famous, but the nuclear industry is another, the oil industry is another. And that job of changing culture, in the end, is the central responsibility if we are going to reduce the agony both for parents and for the professionals involved in the care of babies. But the most powerful way to change culture is to shout out loud and clear those human stories of the terrible, terrible loss involved, because that is the thing that promotes change. So let me finish by commending everyone involved in Baby Loss Awareness Week, the brave members of this House who have spoken out and given hope to many others that they are not alone, but also the many brave members of the public who have relived their own tragedies over and over again to try and promote change in this area. and also the ministers who have a heavy responsibility with respect to this agenda, but I know are taking it with the utmost of seriousness.
Tricia Gibson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to begin by thanking the Honourable Lady for Edisbury for bringing this debate forward. She and I and other members of this House share a particular interest in this issue, and I can hardly believe that another year has passed and we are once again reflecting on Baby Loss Awareness Week, culminating in Baby Loss Awareness Day on the 15th of October. And once again, I wish to say that that day is particularly special to me, not just because it is International Baby Loss Awareness Day, because it was on that day that my son was born, stillborn at full term in 2009. He would have been 10, and he would have been a baby no more. And I think of him every day, but in that respect, I'm no different from any other parent who has gone through that terrible, terrible trauma. And every single bereaved parent who has lost a baby in that way feels exactly the same about their own babies whose lives were ended before they could properly begin. And that's why I've used my position, so far as I possibly can as an MP, to raise awareness of this issue, to help break the taboo around this awful experience, and many members across this House have done the same. This day, this week, is important, and sadly every year more and more people are drawn into the appalling statistics of those who have lost their babies in whatever circumstances. The theme of this year's reflection is about the need for access to mental health support for those who need it in the wake of baby loss, and who could argue with that? Indeed, only last week some of us were here in this very chamber discussing women's mental health. Access for mental health support in the wake of baby loss is important, not just for mums, but for dads too, and indeed other extended family members who are struggling with the loss of a baby they had expected to be welcoming to their family. And yet today, more families will have suffered a stillbirth and somehow have to try to cope with this appalling trauma. Mental health support is very important for bereaved parents who need it, not just from a compassionate point of view or a moral point of view, although these are important, but also from a practical, social and economic point of view. In the past, in debates around these issues, I and others have spoken about the fog of grief that comes from having to bury your own baby, the bewildering sense of the world being turned completely on its head. And the statistical fact is that despite the fact that 50% of marriages end in divorce, parents who suffer the loss of a child are 8 times more likely again to separate, 8 times more likely again to divorce, heaping heartbreak on top of heartache. Easier and more prompt access to the correct mental health support could help mitigate that awful statistic and perhaps assist parents struggling with grief to stay married, to return to the world of work and remain economically active, which can in time prevent the isolation that grief brings with it too often.
Will the Honourable Member give round?
I will indeed.
Sarah Champion. I thank the Honourable Member. Before this job, I ran a children's hospice, and we were able to provide that wraparound care to the whole family. And we worked with hundreds of families in my time there, and I'm really proud to say, because of that care, not one family separated.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention, and that's the kind of support that we need to put in place. And I'm just about to go on to talk about that wraparound care that she's talking about. We know that bereaved parents are more likely to develop depression and other mental health issues, perhaps turning to drink or other forms of self-medication, because we know that those who experience stillbirth or baby loss are at a higher risk of mental health challenges. So there's really no excuse, as the Honourable Lady has said, there really is no excuse, given that we know what we know. There's no excuse not to have measures in place for this awful eventuality for those affected by baby loss. The aftermath of baby loss is no more or no less traumatic for those affected than living through the immediate aftermath and the years following the experience.
Will the Honourable Lady give way?
Well, indeed.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way, and I think she's making a very powerful speech, and I strongly support her call for better access to mental health support. But I think of the difference that the 4-hour target made to quality of care and access to accident and emergency doctors and nurses where needed. And I wonder whether actually we need similar targets in place to ensure that trusts and the NHS in general can be accountable for whether or not access to mental health support is given quickly enough to people who are bereaved in the circumstances that we're talking about.
The Honourable Gentleman for that intervention. And of course, the point I'm trying to make is that because we know that these mental health challenges will arise following baby loss, very often arise following baby loss, there is no reason why the infrastructure shouldn't be in place for when these issues arise, because sometimes the demand can be immediate, sometimes demand can be perhaps months or years after, and sometimes people will choose not to call on those services, but the infrastructure needs to be there to make sure that people have access to it in a timely fashion. Someone pointed out to me today a comment on social media from a chap who spoke about Awareness Day fatigue. But he also acknowledged the importance for those who with lived experience feeling able and willing to speak about their experience of baby loss, because this can encourage others to talk of their own loss and perhaps seek the support and help that they need. We with lived experience who choose to talk about our personal experience can also prevent others going through the awful experience we have by raising that awareness, to stop other people joining the terrible club of which no one would ever wish to be a member. Because raising awareness is very important. It is not and it must not ever become some trite, stock phrase, although it may sometimes sound so. It's important because every day I wish to God I had had some more awareness of preeclampsia, of HELP syndrome, and then I may have been in a better position, and I'm sure many mothers would say the same. I would have been in a better position to articulate what was happening to me, instead of being told by the Southern General Hospital that I was wasting their time when I turned up on the day I was due to deliver my baby, to be told the terrible pain I was in was normal. What did I expect? It wasn't labour. Go home and lie down. Could I not see they were busy? Had I known more about preeclampsia, I would have been able to be asked to be checked specifically for that condition, because I wasn't tested for it. I would have been more assertive instead of being made to feel like an hysterical, older, expectant mother. So raising awareness really does matter. Information matters, because it can make a real difference between life and death, because we know that too often mothers are not always listened to. So raising awareness cannot be seen as a trite phrase or a box-ticking exercise, and I know many who have lived with the loss of their baby would say exactly the same. But the chap commenting on these matters on social media is right to say that a lack of mental health support must be addressed. We cannot be discharging mums to send them home to their partners and families and leave them to get on with it. They must have the support they need, the mental health support they need, to help them navigate the best way they can through the biggest loss, the most appalling experience it is possible for them to have. Now, we have over the years come a distance in the realms of baby loss. We have, with some success, I think, shone a light on it and worked to remove the taboo. But we still need to do more to ensure that isolation of grief does not swallow up those affected by this loss, which goes against everything that nature would suggest. We need to continue to work to break down the isolation, and we can do that with the proper mental health support to help those affected to find their way back to some semblance of normality and help them find a path through their fog of grief so that they can rebuild their lives, albeit around the loss that they have suffered. And it's shocking to learn that the majority of bereaved parents who need help cannot access it in an appropriate place and an appropriate time. This is because perinatal mental health services they're focused on women who are pregnant or have a live baby. Last week in the debate on women's mental health, many of us spoke about new mums needing mental health support, and that's true, they do. But this need not mean, and it must not mean, that those mums whose babies have died are forgotten about. They must not be forgotten about. They must be given the support they need, because we know that they are at risk of developing mental health challenges, and we need to do more to ensure that the mental health infrastructure they need is in place to support them. Women who have experienced stillbirth, miscarriage or ectopic pregnancy are at a higher risk of post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety and depression than those who have not, and they also display clinically significant levels of post-traumatic stress symptoms from 5 to 18 years after the stillbirth. Now, As I was reading some of the testimony from the Lullaby Trust in preparation for this debate, from women who had suffered stillbirth and who described walking out of the hospital with no further contact about the support they might need, I recognised that, because that too was my experience. I didn't feel able to discuss my experience or participate in counselling, but that was just as well because it was never offered. The hospital was, in my case, trying to dodge questions and withhold information about how my baby died. And in response to the point raised by the honourable gentleman who's no longer in his place, the demand for coroners or in Scotland fatal accident inquiries around stillbirths where it's deemed to be in the public interest, that demand has only risen because of hospital trusts and health boards pulling down the shutters when things go wrong. And that's where that demand comes from, and that has to stop, that has to change. Parents don't want to consult a lawyer when their baby dies. They just want to know what went wrong, how it can be avoided. And that's something that health boards and health trusts really need to do more to get their head around. I'm pleased in Scotland there has been new investment in perinatal mental health to ensure that there's support for bereaved parents prior to discharge and appropriate signposting to third sector services who can provide bereavement and other mental health support. Because we can no longer turn a blind eye or overlook those who fall through the gaps in our health system. There must be psychological support for those affected by the death of a baby, if they need it. Would she give way? I will indeed.
She's making an excellent speech, and I commend her bravery for speaking up on this again. I know how hard that is for her. Would she agree with me that there needs to be support for women entering a sort of subsequent pregnancy after that as well? Because that could be quite re-traumatising for some women and quite challenging to deal with, and they need a special amount of support for that as well.
I thank the Honourable Lady, and I think she's made an excellent point, because the shadow of a stillbirth will hang over any subsequent pregnancy should they take place, and that's something that we need to be mindful of. Well, indeed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would my honourable friends join with me at this poignant debate and say how dreadfully sorry we all are that on September the 27th in Bronzefield Women's Prison a baby was born and died. We know no more than that at the moment, but it seemed appropriate in this debate that we pay respects to that baby and its mum.
Absolutely. I absolutely share the Honourable Lady's words, and I think the important thing for all the people affected by that terrible loss is that they get the answers that they need, because you cannot turn back time, but what parents want are answers and explanations, and to have some kind of to know that their baby mattered and that it's not going to be swept under the carpet is extremely important at those times. So I know there might be Awareness Day fatigue, but this particular Awareness Day does matter to those affected by baby loss. It's a week of remembrance culminating in International Baby Loss Remembrance Day on the 15th of October, and it's a space, a day, where we can collectively remember our babies, comforted by the knowledge that others have also experienced this indescribable loss, and they can understand the pain we feel. When you have experienced this, it really is easy to feel that no one could ever comprehend the scale of such a loss, but of course, others who have gone through it do. This day is not just about remembrance of our lost babies, although that is extremely important. It's a reminder that those who live with this are not on their own. Sadly, thousands of people in the UK have suffered this loss, and millions worldwide. There are many who do understand, and more of us are willing to speak out. If we can take some of the isolation out of the grief for our lost babies, if we can better care, give better aftercare for the parents who have suffered this loss, perhaps we can all have better mental health despite suffering such a loss of such huge magnitude in our lives.
Antoinette Sandler.
Thank you, and it's always a pleasure to follow the member for North Ayrshire and Arran, who has been a real support on the APPG for baby loss, and who always speaks incredibly powerfully about not only her own experiences, but what needs to change for the future. And I'm very grateful too to the Leader of the House who gave time for this debate, and the Honourable Member for Banbury, who helped the pincer movement to encourage him to table the debate. I would like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Colchester, who used to co-chair the APPG with me, and particularly give thanks to the Right Honourable Member for South West Surrey. His support for this issue as Health Secretary gave the political will to drive the change through that we have seen in the last few years, and that has been so incredibly important, and it is a testament and a legacy that you have left for parents, particularly seeing the reduction in those numbers, which is so important. And I say that because there is that need for that cultural change, and there's also that need for that cultural change around mental health support. Very often seeking mental health support was seen as something that indicating, well, there was a stigma attached to it. And so my Right Honourable friend, the member for Runnymede, who allocated £1.4 million worth of libel funding, the former Chancellor, gave £1.4 million of libel funding to Alderhay Children's Hospital for them to build a brand new bereavement counselling centre. I went up to see that recently, and it is going to be an exceptional resource in the North West, and any parent who's lost a child, no matter how long ago, can go to Alderhay and get free support and counselling, and I'd like to make sure that people are aware of that. And they also run a hotline that can signpost parents towards help, and I think it's something that this government can be really proud of at the steps that they are taking to tackle some of the deep-rooted issues that there have been around maternity provision, the rates of stillbirth and neonatal deaths. And the progress with the alliance created by the National Bereavement Care Pathway that has been put in place has really been something that should be celebrated. Working with the third sector and the National Health Service, there has been real change. The evaluation of that pathway showed that 92% of parents who went through that pathway felt that they'd been treated with respect, and that 89% felt that they had been communicated with sensitively, and 87% were offered access to ongoing emotional support after they left hospitals. So those trusts that have taken up the pathway have seen a real improvement in the care that has been offered to parents. And not only that, but following on from the point made by the member for South West Surrey, clinicians using the National Bereavement Care Pathway felt that they were better prepared to communicate with bereaved parents, and that had increased to 92%. And the proportion of professionals feeling capable about being able to discuss bad news with bereaved parents had increased from 66 to 72%. Now, there are other excellent results from the evaluation, which I won't go into here. But, yes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful for you giving way, but does my honourable friend also share my concern that that isn't across all health trusts, and we really need to make it statutory?
I absolutely do. And I will come on to that. And having been through the system in Wales, where there was absolutely no bereavement care offered to me at all, and it was, in fact, a charity set up by a former member of this House that paid for me to get counselling from Alderhay, that I am as aware as anybody of the issues that there are around access to support. But 130 NHS trusts have expressed an interest in using the bereavement care pathway, and I think they should be encouraged to take up that best practice. But it is not all good news, and the reality is that many hospital trusts are now putting that support in place. But the gap in provision comes from when parents go back into the community, and it is there that the issues need to be tackled. Information gathered by the Baby Loss Awareness Alliance showed that there was a clear need for specialist psychological support for those parents, and a Freedom of Information Act request sent out by SANS in July 2019 painted a very patchy picture of support, with commissioners in over 86% of areas across the UK telling us that they do not commission specialist therapies to support bereaved parents. And I think that is quite scandalous when you look at the good progress that has been made in the acute sector. So this is an area in which the gap is present. And less than 40% of commissioners said that that support was available for both parents. So when it was available, it was only available for one parent, and that's completely wrong for all the reasons that the member for Colchester outlined in his speech. It shouldn't matter whether you're mum or dad, you should be able to access specialist psychological report if it's needed. And why is that important? Well, 60% of bereaved parents said that in the end they did feel that they needed psychological support, and I know certainly I didn't want to go and talk to a load of volunteers. I wanted to talk to a professional who could give me the tools and the understanding both to deal with my daughter and how to cope with her loss, but also to give me the tools to be able to go back to work and start functioning in a normal way. And I think it is right to acknowledge that women who experience stillbirth, miscarriage or ectopic pregnancy are at high risk of post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety and depression. And I remember giving a speech in the city at a law firm who told me it was extremely common that mothers never went back to work having lost a child because of the impact of that loss on them. And so by investing in that support, what we do is encourage the family to stay together and to get to a place where it is possible to live with your loss and still contribute to society. And where there's been a sudden or unexpected death, 39% of women 3 months after suffering an early pregnancy loss meet the criteria for probable to moderate post-traumatic stress disorder. And 68% of mothers and 44% of partners reported 4 or more negative psychological symptoms at 10 days. So the important bill that was brought forward by the member for Thirsk and Walton that allowed some paid bereavement leave for parents allows some time for parents to come to terms with the issues that they faced, and also, very importantly, to try and find the services that will help them deal with the loss that they have suffered. So I'd really like to encourage ministers to read the Life After Loss report, which was published last week by the Centre for Mental Health. And can I support the Minister in the ambitions about rolling out national centres that will permit parents to access that support locally. Working with commissioners and the third sector, who can very often have expertise in this area, and where support can be commissioned locally without the need for the necessarily infrastructure, because there's already a third sector organisation, and I'm thinking of the Petals charity, for example, who provides counselling, but not all over the UK, and their services are not all over the UK. And there's another really good example in Wales, which is To Wish Upon a Star. This charity is proactive in its approach and not reactive. They contact parents within hours of them leaving hospital to discuss their loss and see what support they need. They are then able to put a counsellor in a car and on the way to the bereaved parents within hours, rather than having to wait weeks or months for a referral. Now, that kind of service, delivered by the third sector, but supported by the National Health Service, if we could roll that out in areas where there are gaps in provision, that would make a huge difference to parents' lives. So, Minister, I'm going to ask the government, because I said as the chair of the APPG I would celebrate success, but I would also hold feet to the fire to undertake a review of current provision, including the evaluation of the models of best practice involving parents and professionals, to develop quality standards and national guidance to support those planning the funding and delivery of specialist psychological support. And that must be delivered at CCG levels. Acute hospitals are really beginning to deal with this, but it's the provision at a local level that needs to be addressed, and to provide guidance to support local services to effectively assess the psychological support needs of bereaved parents and develop pathways to meet those needs. It's been a real pleasure, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we are able to speak in this debate, an advantage of not proroguing, as it were, and to speak at the beginning of Baby Loss Awareness Week, because it does show the valuable work that is done in this House and that is achieved by cross-party working with a government that has been really committed to pushing forward this agenda. But there is more work to do, and with the previous commitment to trying to put mental health services on a parity with physical health services, this is really an area that needs addressing, so that support is put in place.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a real privilege to follow the Honourable Member for Edisbury, who, of course, speaks from personal experience on this matter, and every year I think she absolutely identifies the main issues that we still need to improve on. She's absolutely right to talk about the evaluation showing where things are getting better, but I think it's also fair to say that the good practice is not consistently felt across the board, and that's really what we need to aim for. And she also spoke about the need to change the culture, which I think is a really important area as well. That's something that the Right Honourable Member for South West Surrey also referred to. And I'd like at this point to welcome him to the back benches. I know we had our disagreements on the front benches, but I think on this issue there was a great deal of unanimity, and I think that's the spirit we should carry forward in respect to this. And I think that they both spoke about the need to change the culture and the length of time that will take, but I think that is absolutely the right approach to take, because very often with all tragedies in the health service, most of the time people just want to know why something happened and how it can be stopped from happening again. And I think that the more we can move away from the blame culture and really get into a proper analysis of why things have happened and how we can prevent them happening in the future, the better the experience will be for everyone. So when I first spoke in the Baby Loss Awareness debates back in 2016, I did express the hope at the time that this would become an annual fixture, and I'm pleased to see that we have managed to do that despite the, shall we say, unpredictable timing of Parliament at the moment. But it does give us, I think, a real opportunity to take stock of where we are and hopefully set some benchmarks for future progress, because, as we know, every year there are thousands of tragedies. Tommy's estimate that a quarter of pregnancies end in miscarriage. The Ectopic Pregnancy Trust tell us 1 in 80 pregnancies are ectopic, and SANS tell us, as we've heard already, 15 babies are stillborn or die shortly after birth every day. And those charities are just some of the 60 plus who collaborate to support this extremely important week. And I would like to echo the comments made by other members, thanking and praising their work in this vital area, not just for the way that they support people who have had their own personal tragedy, but also for the way they work across the board to try and secure better outcomes for everyone, not just in terms of raising awareness of baby loss, but also working with health professionals to improve the services in bereavement care, and also, critically, to reduce the number of preventable deaths. And as other people have mentioned, I want to focus on bereaved parents and mental health support in my comments today. As we all know from meeting bereaved parents, the feelings of loss and isolation are understandably overwhelming, and it's, of course, a completely understandable response, and nothing will take away from that. But that doesn't mean that we can't do more to ensure the right care and support is in place at the right time for those people to come to terms as best as they can with their loss, because we do know from the evidence that good bereavement care can make a difference to parents and families and their experiences at these tragic times.
So the sooner we can support more healthcare professionals to deliver good quality care, the better. And I welcome the rollout of the pathway, but again, I would urge the government to redouble their efforts to ensure that all trusts and health boards adopt the pathway and ensure that all our healthcare professionals feel properly equipped to deal with bereaved parents, so that everyone across the board gets the correct and best level of support that they truly deserve. So not all bereaved parents will develop a mental health problem, but we must ensure that those that do are able to access the specialist psychological support as soon as possible. They access it at a time and at a place that is right for them, and of course that it is freely available to them. Because unfortunately, as we know, sadly, it's not always the case that parents are able to do that at the moment. Parents have told me that they're often not aware of the services that are available. Many leave hospitals with no information about where they can seek support. Some are given information, but then they find that support isn't available for them at the time that they need it, because of course there is a waiting list. And a survey by SANS earlier this year found that nearly 2/3 of bereaved parents felt that although they needed specialist psychological services, they were unable to access them on the NHS. I know this is equally a challenge for those who seek bereavement counselling for adult deaths, and even urgent referrals for that can take up to 6 months to process, which is, I think we all agree, far too long. I'll just quote the words of one mother who contacted me, and she said, "We weren't offered any specialist help in terms of bereavement support. I visited my GP on a number of occasions, and I was advised I could see a counsellor, but there was a waiting list. I was prescribed antidepressants, which I refused to take as I was grieving. I wasn't depressed." And I suspect there will be many people listening to this debate who will recognise that experience. I hope that we can learn in the future that it's absolutely vital that the right support, that means the right treatments, are available at the right time. A new report from the Baby Loss Awareness Alliance reveals that nearly 9 out of 10 CCGs do not commission talking therapies specifically for parents, and where the services do exist, they're mostly for mothers only, meaning the needs of fathers, as the Honourable Member for Colchester has spoken about in the past, are often overlooked. There is, of course, much good practice out there, but it is sometimes reliant on charitable grants and third parties, meaning that the provision is patchy and, of course, is at risk at times from wider funding decisions. So I support a call for a review of the current provision, including evaluation of the models of best practice involving parents and professionals in that conversation. And we know the need for psychological support following pregnancy, loss and stillbirth is recognised in the NICE guidance. And at the Better Births report, the Maternity Transformation Programme and the NHS Long-Term Plan all highlight the need to improve perinatal mental health care. But these plans must translate into action to ensure the needs of bereaved parents are explicitly addressed in quality standards and national guidance, in training for relevant healthcare professionals, and guidance and support for local services. But beyond the major transformational strategies that we have been talking about today, we can also make simple, small changes that will actually make a difference to parents' experience. And here's some words from another constituent who said after her own bereavement, she said, "That moment, I know myself, stays with you as much as the birth, and most of us end up bumping into other new parents carrying their bundles home on the way out. I feel a support worker or midwife could do with walking the parents out, helping the transition into the hands of family or friends go more smoothly. That would be extremely beneficial. Most of us are left with not even so much as a leaflet of where to turn to in a crisis. Most of us haven't had a follow-up with a midwife or healthcare professional, even though we have given birth, and these unfortunate administrative errors occur far too often." And she says, "I suppose support is the key issue." And I think those comments sum it up actually really how some very simple and straightforward things can be done, which don't need to cost the earth, don't need massive national strategies, but actually just need a little bit more thought and organisation taking place. And I think we can all recognise the difficulty that that mother must have experienced in that situation. I think just in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would say that having participated in these debates over the last 3 years, members have shown a great deal of personal courage by raising their own experiences. And I think 3 years on, we've shown actually that the message is getting out there to people that they're not alone, and I pay tribute to the members for Lucian, Deptford, Washington and Sunderland West, Edinburgh, Colchester and Banbury for their work in this area and for the way